Greetings all. Our Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra video series continues with verse 59, yukti number 31 in my numbering, which it should be noted doesn't match anyone else's numbering. But the verse number is the same across the board in all the translations, verse number 59 in this case. So let's explore the practice here, which is a simple one and perhaps a quirky one. We'll start by chanting the verse together. Ghaṭādi-bhājane dṛṣṭiṃ bhittīs tyaktvā vinikṣipet tallayaṃ tatkṣaṇād gatvā tallayāt tanmayo bhavet. Let's do it again. Ghaṭādi-bhājane dṛṣṭiṃ bhittīs tyaktvā vinikṣipet tallayaṃ tatkṣaṇād gatvā tallayāt tanmayo bhavet. Literally means one may cast one's gaze into a well-formed vessel, such as a pot and the like, and leaving aside its walls, become absorbed in the space it encloses. At the very moment the mind dissolves into that space, because of that dissolving, one becomes of the same nature as that spacious openness. Okay, so I said that was a literal translation, and it is, but I have added material parenthetically to make it make sense. The construction of the verses is simplistic and perhaps elliptical in the sense of almost overly condensed. Doesn't really give us much. So if we leave aside the parenthetical information, it really just says, one should cast one's gaze into a well-formed vessel, such as a pot or the like, leaving aside its walls. At the very moment one dissolves into that, because of that dissolving, one becomes of the same nature as that. So that's the super literal translation. So what's the actual practice here? Well, for me, it's one that happens spontaneously in everyday life when one happens across such a well-formed vessel. We'll see that this is part of a little bit of a theme. In the next verse, the author invites us to contemplate a blank wall or a mountain or a treeless landscape. And these are obviously things that we come across in everyday life. So we're starting to get just a little bit into everyday life stuff in this section, which will be much more prominent in a later section after the bliss practices. Then we have a whole section of the text that's all about opportunities in everyday life. And in a sense, this is one of them. It's like when your gaze happens to fall upon an empty vessel, you just let your mind become absorbed in that space. So you could do it as a formal practice. You could, take it's like, I've got a nice ceramic bowl here. I'm just going to put that down and then gaze at the space and let my mind become absorbed in that space. But I do think, especially in light of the following verse, that what the author has in mind is like, anytime you happen to see an empty vessel, just pause for a moment, do a micro meditation, and let your awareness become absorbed in that vessel. So it could again be spontaneous, it could be a formal practice if you like, but again, the author doesn't give us much to go on here. I should also just mention one other interesting linguistic point. In the previous verse, we had the word bhajana, meaning a worthy vessel or a an appropriate vessel. And there the word meant you, it meant the practitioner. In the previous verse, the practitioner becomes a vessel for dissolution, right? In this contemplation of everything as void. But here we have an actual literal vessel intended. How do we know it's literal? Because the author says ghaṭādi, a pot, and so on. Now, ghaṭa can only mean a pot. Well, actually, now that I say that, occasionally ghaṭa, in specific sources, ghaṭa can also mean the body. In some tantric sources, ghaṭa can mean the body, but it almost always means literally a pot, like a clay pot. So maybe a double meaning is intended here. Maybe it's saying the worthy vessel, or a well-formed vessel, meaning to say a pot or one's body and the like. Because certainly we had bhajana in the sense of the practitioner in the previous verse. So perhaps the author is being a little bit playful here in this use of the word bhajana in two successive verses in two different senses, or not. So anyway, the possibilities. You can contemplate it for yourself. But here, okay, we also have the word bhitti, which means walls or sides, or kind of partitions. So it does seem to suggest that what the author has in mind is, again, a literal vessel, a literal clay or ceramic vessel, because, again, the verse says, leaving aside the walls, meaning you're focusing on the space, you're not focusing on the physical vessel. You're focusing on the space that it encloses. So that's why you're supposed to bhittīs tyaktvā, leave aside the walls or the partitions. So if ghaṭa here is an esoteric word for the body, then it would mean leaving aside the skin and focusing on the space that the skin encloses as pure void. I don't think that's meant, because we already had that practice earlier in the previous spaciousness section. We had exactly that practice. So I think it probably is, a literal vessel. So the point is, one should cast one's gaze into a well-formed vessel, such as a pot or the like, leaving aside its walls. So you become absorbed in the space that vessel encloses. At the very moment, tatkṣaṇād, at the very moment of the mind dissolving into that space, or awareness dissolving, it's not specified here. And here there's that gray area. We can use the word mind or awareness to actually mean the same thing here. But there's a dissolution. There's a dissolution into that space of mind or awareness. The mind becomes space, you might say, in contemplating space. And because of that dissolving, one becomes of the same nature as that spacious openness. So there's this collapse that is being sought here. This is the key to understanding the verse, and a number of other verses actually, that there's a collapse of seer and seen. So instead of kind of me, mind, and space, three different things, I'm using the mind to perceive space. I am using mind to perceive space. Instead of those three things, there is a collapse. So I-ness and the instrument of perception, mind, and the space all collapse together. So there's a collapse of the trika of seer, seeing, and seen into a unity of spacious openness. And that is a key teaching in this lineage of Shaiva Tantra, the Trika lineage. One of the key triads that gives the lineage its name, indeed, is this seer, seeing, seen, or hearer, hearing, heard, or thinker, thinking, thought. It's the same triad, right, just inflected through different sense capacities. So that's all there is to it. Really. This is the kind of practice that either works or it doesn't for any given person. It's gonna work within a couple of minutes, or it's not. So I don't advise you to spend 20 minutes staring at your pots because I'm sure you can intuit, are you the kind of person for whom this type of practice is going to work or not, right? This is another Shambhava Upaya sort of practice where, just like some of us when we were young had that capacity, or that habit, perhaps I should say, of just sort of staring off into space and spacing out and going totally blank. And maybe it's only for a few seconds, maybe it's for a couple minutes, But usually adults would try to pull us out of it. They'd be like, whoa, whoa, come back, which is unfortunate, really, because those are very restful moments. And it can be a zoning out where you're kind of abstracted, or it can be a moment of pure presence. Onlookers can't actually tell which it is. But that same sort of capacity of the mind to just space out and go blank is being invoked here. And as we'll see, if this version of the practice doesn't work for you, stare at the space in a pot. Nope, not happening, then the next verse will give you these other options. A treeless landscape, a blank wall, a mountain, and so on. And so that you're just invited to simply drop into the version of spacing out in which you are present, right? It's not an abstraction or a dissociation. You're present, and yet your awareness is just absorbed in a vast open space, or a tiny open space, as the case may be. So we won't actually do the practice because if you don't happen to have a appropriate vessel handy, you're not going to be able to do it with me. maybe I'll do it when signing off. But it is a practice that I can relate to, and for me it's a micro meditation. I haven't spent more than a few minutes at a time gazing into an empty vessel, but I have gazed into an empty vessel many times for a couple of minutes, and had very, very sweet, very still micro meditations in that way. And so give it a try. Give it a try for yourself. And we'll continue with another yukti tomorrow, because now we're in a section of the text where these practices are super simple. So we went from very complex classical tantric yoga practices to these VBT innovations that are quite simple. And as we'll see coming up, they get subtler, even though they remain simple. So that's it for now. Nice short video this time, and hope to see you again soon as we continue to explore this section of the text. Oh, there's some comments I didn't see before. Hi, Nicola. Hi, Renee. Hi, everyone. Andrew. Rowan. Oh, Rowan says, quite rightly, I should have mentioned it, this works great with a singing bowl, because a singing bowl is a bhajana, a well-formed vessel. They're so well-formed, and they're perfect for enclosing sort of just the right amount of space. So yeah, you could gaze into a singing bowl and just let your mind become the space in the singing bowl. Thank you, Rowan. Absolutely. I've done that, and it seems to work, perhaps even better, just because of the shape of those bowls somehow. I don't know. Yes, as Aubrey mentions, pramata, pramana, prameya are collapsing into unity in this practice. And again, they either do or they don't. And you don't need to try to force it, there's no point to that. Yeah, so yeah, your teacup, you could finish your tea. That's a great idea, Tara. You could finish your tea in the morning and then just gaze into your teacup, and just have that moment. if it works, that's a perfect time in your daily life to do that. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, patrons, and onward. Om.